Okay, welcome everyone to the webinar hosted by Frontline Data Solutions. My name is Ren Lu You, and I'm the CEO of Frontline. Our guest today is Sheldon Primus. Sheldon is a Certified Occupational Safety Specialist. He has a Master's of Public Administration with a concentration in environmental policy, and he's been in the environmental and occupational safety field since 1994. Sheldon served as part of the Wastewater Environmental Federation, Water Sector Safety Committee, and the US EPA Task Force on All Hazards Communication Training for the water and wastewater sector. Currently, Sheldon is the executive director of a nonprofit, National Environmental and Occupational Safety Training, and CEO of Shellbro Safety, an international safety consulting, training, and regulatory compliance assistance company. We're excited to have Sheldon with us here today to talk about the latest trends in safety training and how organizations are adapting to the times. Welcome, Sheldon.
All right. Thank you, Ren. Thank you for having me on. This is awesome.
Absolutely. So, so let's jump right in here. So, we're now sitting here in March 2022, and we're 2 years into the pandemic. So what sort of trends have you seen in terms of how organizations have adapted their health and safety training, both in terms of how it's being delivered and also the content of that training?
Yeah, it's been a big change. And generally what happened is at first, no one really wanted to trust online. They just kept the impression that being online meant that, it was not as credible as being face to face. So then we had to, in the training world, had to face that head on real quick when it was time for dealing with the pandemic. So one of the things that I've noticed is not only did coming through this, have you seen a lot of regulatory agencies embrace online, but then now the crediting bodies have been starting to brace online to know that you could still have quality online training, even though you're not face to face or in a room. And there's other, protocols that you needed to take just in case you wanted to make sure that everyone's on the same playing field. But I understand that right now, most of the companies I deal with, they're actually looking at such a huge profit margin from doing stuff online. They don't have to worry about making the coffees and having someone there physically opening the door and paying for that salary and lunches and everything else. So there is a benefit to that. But I honestly believe that when the pandemic hit, it propelled something in this industry for training online that was coming slowly and drips and drabs. And then the pandemic hits, and now we have to do it like right now. and we adapted pretty well for it.
Okay, interesting. One of the key things that differentiates the sorts of industries that we work with, like chemicals, oil and gas, food and beverage, manufacturing, is people doing real things in the real world, right? So, working with real equipment, working with real materials. So because of that, is there kind of a clear distinction between what sorts of training makes sense to host online and to do remotely, and what sorts of training still need to be done just in person, in front of in a physical space?
Yeah, we actually have many industries globally that will regulate training. So, for instance, I'm in the U.S. In the U.S. market, we know that for OSHA as our head, which is Occupational Safety and Health Administration, for those of you outside the U.S., our entity for just powered industrial trucks, the forklifts that you use, it's a requirement that you would actually need both in-house assessment and then also a classroom component, and the classroom component can be online. So you will still need to have both of those in-person classroom settings. However, in most cases, I honestly believe that even industries such as oil and gas and activities such as permit required confined space, you're going to end up having where the training can be learning management system based, but the assessment still has to be frontline supervisor. The assessment still has to be the worker themselves acting on what they've just learned. So that's never changed. It's always been that way. It's just now you could start the training on the person's schedule as opposed to having to shut down everyone at the same time and you're going to lose productivity. Now you have a way of actually doing your training on different time schedules, and therefore that now can be even more advantage to that industry. But it's still the same where you got to know that the training has affected the worker enough by actual practical work. And that's where you're going to see, the hybrid type things. Like I mentioned before, first is the classroom training, but the assessment is the key. And that's, did you retain the knowledge that you were trained? Meaning, was this training good? And that's how it really breaks down.
Yeah, that makes sense. We as a company offer an LMS, that's been the market for a long time, and something that we've seen is obviously an uptick in web-based training, right? So that makes total sense. People are doing more of this digitally now. But what's interesting is that we've also seen an uptick in the amount of training being tracked in our system, but that's taking place in physical space. So, assessments and instructor-led trainings. The amount of those that have actually been tracked and administered in our system has actually gone up, even though the actual content is still delivered in person, with an instructor standing next to you, reviewing your forklift driving skills or what have you. So
yeah, you need them both, and the tracking is key, because once you could get a system that tracks your training, then that becomes defensible. And though we're not always talking litigation, however, if there is regulation, then at that point you need to prove that yes, you've trained a certain amount of students. Here's what's the key to the training. Here's the learning objectives and all that. When that's being proven, then at that point, then the missing component is, did you demonstrate, or this worker demonstrate that they've got this learning? And so those two together is how organizations are going to really run well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a question about kind of what your experience is with organizations and how they work with contractors. So have you seen any changes in terms of how organizations leverage kind of full-time employees versus part-time kind of external help in the form of contractors? Because I could see it cutting both ways with the way things are going right now. So I could see that there's some worker shortages in some industries that might, and there's folks that are out sick periodically from various COVID outbreaks. So that might increase the reliance on contractors. But on the other hand, there might be more concerns about being able to properly do health and safety training to kind of control who goes in and out of a facility, and that might be a heightened concern right now, and so that might decrease the reliance on contractors. So, what have you actually seen with the clients that you work with?
Yeah, actually, I've seen on both fronts. So that's the universal answer to most consultants, right? We're always like, depends. So
Right.
it just depends, right? So here's the school of thought behind that. You'll have some industries that will need security clearances, and they'll need a few other things, even the intrinsically safe devices, as if you're going to an oil and gas facility or something similar to that. Those devices themselves will lean to, if you're the trainer, you're going to have to give them that material ahead of time so that you don't bring your computer on there and mess up their system and all that. So with the actual process that it takes to get into a facility, in some cases, it still would be a little bit easier for someone to have their group to get together in a training location and then still broadcast either a live thing or have their people on their own workstations take an LMS system. So in those cases, I have seen where the workforce, they still like the learning management system because of the mere fact that there's more flexibility in the system. And I don't think that's going to change, because once you see flexibility, That then could lead to, if we have a production issue and we can't actually do a stand down right now because there is the bona fide production thing that we need to take care of, that doesn't mean that you backburner your training, that it's not important. It just means now you have the alternative to do an LMS type system where now you could have individuals take it on their own time, or have them take it where it's company time, but it's not during the time frame where you're going up against a production issue or something similar to that. So I still believe that component is still there, and that when you're thinking about the protocol for getting someone in for physically training, yes, there'll be trainers that are going to still go through whatever is necessary by proving vaccination or getting your COVID test before you get there. So that just really depends on the consultant themselves. But then you'll also know that there's possible price increases at that point too, because now you're physically getting that person here. You got to pay for their drive time. You got to pay for whatever the amount of time they're going to be there and the material that they're going to use for training. So that's all going to be in that bid and that contract. So it's the give and take that the client will have to say, how important is it that I physically get someone here because I need to make a point, or is my workforce such a strong enough intellectual workforce and entity, and we've given them the resources for it, that they could do this on their own? So that's why I say depends. But in most industries, generally, you're going to still see ease will win. Whatever is going to take it the simplest form for them to get their workers trained, because training, you got to have it. It's just, you got to have it. So in those cases, they're going to go with ease.
Gotcha. Yeah, actually, that's a great point you bring up about the owners ultimately kind of bearing the cost of whatever decision they make, right? So they can mandate third-party contractors to come in for physical for training in person. They can mandate all sorts of things, and generally speaking, the folks that are working for them will go along with it because they want the business. But at the end of the day, one way or another, the owners kind of making those mandates end up absorbing the cost because they get passed through from the folks that they're hiring, right? So if you're able to save your contractors some effort and some time and some money, that usually ends up being good for your bottom line as well. So that's an great insight.
It also helps yourself if like you get a nice set LMS system, and that your contractors, if you are mandating this as the host employer, then now that the contractors are going to have unanimity, whatever that word would be, right? that they all would actually have the same type of training. So in that case, the expectations will be the same for each contractor and subcontractor, because that the LMS that you provided for them puts everybody in equal playing field for that knowledge base. So then that now becomes a little bit easier for you to have faith in your subcontractors that they're doing the right thing.
Appreciate you elaborating on that. So we talked a lot about kind of some of these trends of more of this training going digital and trying to conduct it off-site and all that. So what are some of the best practices that you see for doing training in this way? Obviously not. I think trying to just take something that used to be in person and in physical space and just trying to jam it into PowerPoint presentation or something. I think there's definitely some pitfalls there. So what do you see as kind of the best practice for trying to make this transition?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because there's been a lot of people who are trying to get out of physically being in class. And at the time of pandemic, it was something we just couldn't have done. And now that we're trending towards endemic, people are getting right back out. And the thought would be this. In a classroom, you have so many of your senses available to you and the students themselves, So you're going to end up missing a few things because every student's a different type of learner. So as you're in the classroom and you can physically start feeling the vibe, if you will, of man, they're with me today, or they are not there. We need some coffee, or you see some stirring, and you're like, all right, break time. So those are some of the things that you know that you could adjust when you're physically in a class. So now, when you're using just two of your senses, which is truly visual and audio, then what do you do when you have a kinesthetic learner that needs to tap something or they need to do something? So then you introduce the chat feature. All right, gang, let's go ahead and let's chat. All right, now give me your answer to this. What hazard are you seeing on the screen? And at that point, then now you're engaging that type of learner. That's going to help them. And eventually, you're going to end up having to do as much as you can, because there's some times where you're going to see your people, such as in a Zoom meeting, and you can see everyone there, you can see their reaction. It's extremely tough for you as the consultant or the trainer, because you're going to have to monitor every one of those little boxes in that screen. And if someone sneezes, you can say, oh, bless you. Or if someone, cat goes by, you're like, oh, look at that cute cat. That's going to take away some of the pressure of being in class with air quotes, where at that time you truly can engage the environment that that person's in right now. So therefore, you're pulling them into your environment while you're engaging them in their environment. So it kind of takes them off of I'm here to learn versus, oh, I'm just having fun with a friend, or I'm learning stuff, but it's less where they feel like you are just cramming information down their throat, like the death by PowerPoint that we've always heard of. And for the PowerPoint and the slides, honestly, they're there for the students. You don't have to read every bullet. You're wasting your time. They're reading it anyway. So at that point, that kind of learning is not, or at least that type of teaching isn't going to get the valued response that you're looking for. And the other thing that you may have to adjust, and truly, since we're dealing with audio senses and visual senses, that means as an instructor, you're going to end up having to buy equipment. You're going to have to buy equipment that's going to make your voice sound good. You're going to have to buy equipment where your camera looks good. I've got, a soundboard. So at sometimes if I wanted to ask a class a question, I got nothing. That's the thing going through your mind, right? You're hearing crickets. So at this point, you can up your game a little if you're going to have to do theater of the mind. It's almost like if you're going back to the days of, AM radio when there was no TV and they had the theater of the mind. You might have to do that for your training so that you can grab people in and you use your voice as best as you can. You use your hands if you need to. You use your inflections this way or that way. And honestly, if you're online, your students are online as well, encourage them to open a separate tab and say, all right, follow me on your computer, and this is where we're going to go find. So you're pulling them away from PowerPoint, you're taking them on the slides. So now you're looking at someone who is kinesthetic, using their tools right there, their mouse, and typing in. So they're engaged. The person who's auditory learner, they're listening to you. They're listening to the way that you are going ahead and go through. They're speaking through the way you're teaching them to find whatever you're showing them. And then the visual learners, you're showing your screen. So now they're going to click and they're going to be watching everything you're doing. You're capturing all the senses you have available. And until you can start, smell-o-vision on some of our training, we're going to just have to use the senses we've got available. And then from there, you just find your own rhythm. That's the key. Just be yourself. If you're not yourself, you're going to lose everybody anyway. So might as well just be yourself and have a good time. And if you're having a good time, your students are going to have a good time.
Absolutely. So, I think over the last couple of years, there's been just so many changes. And I think some of the obstacles that you're describing with trying to deliver training virtually, I think some of those obstacles, people have found ways to overcome them. But, still, though, even now, 2 years on, there's still a lot of folks who are pretty resistant to making, to really putting anything online or to do any kind of training remotely. So, what are some of those reservations that people have? This might be a good place for us to wrap up. So, it feels a lot like there's kind of this sea change over the last few years, and people are kind of being, driven to kind of adopt these new technologies and to do more of their training, where they can, doing it remotely. And yeah, I still encounter a lot of folks who are, kind of stuck in kind of, 2019 kind of mindset or earlier, where really they, as much as possible, they're trying to just get back to that, right? Even if they've had to make some changes recently, they're kind of itching to just kind of go back to the way things were. So, what are some of those concerns? I mean, I think there are some genuine concerns, and I guess to what extent can they be mitigated?
Yeah, most of the concerns will boil down to confidence. And the confidence is in many different ways. You may not have confidence in your technology. You may not have confidence in how to do a streaming or how to do LMS class. Or you may not just truly have confidence in, can you deliver something without an audience? Can you pretend that there's an audience there? And some people don't have that trust in themselves that they could do it. So generally what I tell them to do is, yes, you can start in a mirror, but that's not as natural as it is that you would anywhere else. So first, I would say just go ahead and start like doing some of your smaller type of conferences through the Zoom setting or with Teams or one of the other things. And that's going to be your first just foray into this, because now you're dealing with looking in a camera and talking to a camera. And after that, then you may want to go ahead and start giving yourself the opportunity to go over your presentation while you're recording yourself. And again, just getting used to staring at a camera and seeing how that feels, and getting where you're not thinking about yourself as much, because that's when you get into the higher level, and when you get into like the pinnacle of Maslow's pyramid, where it is, self-actualization, when you're ready to get back and give back to somebody, then it doesn't become about you anymore. So when you're literally in there and you're starting to have a classroom setting or even an LMS setting where eventually someone's going to be watching this video because they need this training to get their job or to stay in their job, then at that point, forget about me. It's not about me. I might be nervous, but this person needs me. And then at that point, you're getting out of yourself, so you don't have that syndrome where everyone knows where you're the imposter. How am I supposed to give knowledge to someone else? That's a fear. And when those fears happen, it cripples you, and then you can't deliver because you're thinking too much about you. It's your students. You're doing it for the students. They're going to look at this, if it's live or if it's later on. They're going to look at this. You're having an interaction with them right now, even though you're talking to a camera and a mic. You're actually in the future talking to that student that is going to be going through this test. They're going through this LMS system. And that's honestly the way to combat it. Get out of you, think about them, and then practice.
Yeah, that's great advice. One of the things that I've found to be a real level up is to train myself to not look at the preview image of me on a webcam. I think that's I feel like it's a very natural impulse to look at, if there's a mirror kind of put up to your face, it's very natural to look at it, even if there's other stuff going on. And I can definitely see that causing some self-consciousness, in an instructor, and it can be a real distraction from the real goal of communicating stuff to the folks that are learning from you. So, okay, well, Sheldon, this has been fantastic. So thanks so much for giving us a few minutes of your time here. And I think this might be a good time to open things up to Q&A. Okay, so it looks like we have one question that asks, are you seeing adoption of online training in certain industries more so than others? So I guess the question is about whether certain industries are picking up on some of these trends of going digital, going online, versus other industries.
There's a lot of industries that are going to use online training, and generally it's by one or two factors, one being regulation, and then the second one being their safety culture. So as far as industries, what you would have to look for to see the ones that are really going to really see the value in it, you might have to start with regulation. So you're going to look for companies or industries that are being regulated more. Most regulations will have a training component. So at that point, that would be a driver. And then the second one would be, again, your personal experience with that, or at least being able to see the safety culture of that organization. People with healthy safety cultures will value any kind of training. So if you have the possibility and you're going to get this by hearing things, you're going to hear people talk about, man, this is a good company, you got to work here, or we should go there. When you do hear those things, perk up, grab your LinkedIn, look through the organization as much as you can, do some vetting. And at that point, you'll be able to see breadcrumbs to show you that, oh yeah, they care about training. Follow the breadcrumbs and reach out to the person who is the safety coordinator. And that's the contact you'll be looking for there.
Very interesting. So another question we got was about the cost of remote training compared to classroom training. So do you have any information, or do you have any, I guess, hunches or information about kind of how those two stack up? So I guess what should people be thinking about when they're considering the cost of doing this sort of thing in person, like they've been used to, and doing it online?
Yeah, the cost is going to be varied, and again, like everything, we give the depends as the precursor. So here's what we're looking for that that idea. Excuse me, I had my background noise kick in there. So I can't answer the cost part as specifically as I would like, but here's the thought process behind it, what you're looking for. Um, for remote, you're thinking about with organizations, people are going to want to have this training over and over and over again. So they will be willing to pay for something, even if it's a little bit higher than being priced as a live training. They're going to be willing to pay for it if they know that they're going to be using it for a long period of time. So that means if you are doing the pricing, you're going to price things such as first, how long is it going to take you to do the project? How many people are going to be there? Because classroom management takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy. What's happening afterwards? Are you doing your certificate? Are you doing certificate management? Are you submitting it for continuing education units? All that is going to be brought into the price, and you're going to have to pay for those things in both scenarios. But the willing to pay part, which is an actual concept, the willing to pay part of each organization will differ. And generally speaking, people that want you in person, it's for a reason. They want to make sure that they're going to capture their audience, which is their workers, and they're going to make sure that the workers are paying attention right there, right then in real time. So generally, you're going to price it as such. And that price tag for real time is generally going to be a little higher than remote, because when it's remote, it's at that person's time period when they're doing it. So it's asynchronistic. So at that point, you really want to make sure that it's going to be generally a higher price if you're in person. And again, all the variables I told you. But then you do want to make sure if you're going to do something remote and you're going to price it to the fact that they're going to come back and see it again and again. Your price tag's going to differ because of currencies and values and stressors and factors such as regulatory drivers. You got to be acute to that. And that's a whole different conversation on how to price. But people are willing to pay for remote, but then you got to think of competition. So now you're thinking of, and sorry, Ren, I'm going I'm going with all the views here. But then if you're
No
thinking of
problem.
competition, then you're also going to be thinking of what differs me from someone else. So your experience, your knowledge, your delivery method, that's going to justify your cost. So it's okay to stick to your cost. But I would imagine you're going to pay more for in-person classes versus virtual for those reasons.
Mhm. Yeah, those are some great points. And just to add a few more from what we've seen on this side of things. So one thing to consider when evaluating costs for two solutions like this, either doing it in person or trying to do it online, there are a bunch of different categories of costs. So one of the things is reducing redundancy. So if there is some sort of organized system that allows you to track people easily and to be able to monitor what sort of training that they have or have not taken in, let's say, the last 12 months, that eliminates a lot of redundancy. So people don't have to go through the same training repeatedly. I've also found that a lot of online training tends to be smaller bites. They can be shorter. So you can have something that really only is very small in scope, and you can train somebody on it for 10 minutes. Whereas it tends to be the case that in-person training, it feels a little weird to sit somebody down and then give them a training, and then that only takes 5 or 10 minutes. It tends to fill kind of more of the space that it's given. And then the last point I'll make on this is there are different direct and indirect costs associated with this. And the direct ones are the most obvious. They're things like having to pay for training, having to pay the contractor some sort of the cost that they're passing on. But also there are a lot of indirect costs, like if there's some sort of contractor that has to go to a third party location to physically to receive the training physically, then that tends to be a cost that gets passed on. So the commute time, so whatever the hourly wage of the person that you're hiring is, that if they have to spend an extra hour and a half or 2 hours just driving around, that ends up being a cost that gets passed on too. And then when you're training these folks on site, there's not only the cost to the person that is being trained, but also the cost associated with the person administering the training. So that person, they can't do anything else while they're actually administering the training. So it's a complicated topic, but there are a lot of different kind of categories of cost, and it's easy to overlook a lot of the more subtle ones. Okay, so looks like we had another question. What do you believe will be the biggest driving force to continued remote training in the post-COVID world? So I think I'll just add a little bit to that question. Sheldon, have you seen any kind of reversion to the way things were done previously now that we're 2 years into the pandemic and COVID is less of an acute issue than it was, let's say, a year and a half ago? So have you seen, what do you see as kind of the new normal now that things have calmed down a bit?
Yeah, the new normal, as I'm seeing it, is actually people now that they know that online training is as good as in-person training with the right instructor, the right delivery method, everything else. So now I'm actually seeing where industries are going to this. I'm getting people that are calling me for online 10-hour training, which before it was always in person. So, and I don't believe we're post-COVID yet. So just the question itself, I think it's going to be more of a flux. So I think online training and remote training is going to be used and utilized in ways where you're going to see it almost like a hotspot, if you would. A cluster here would end up having maybe an outbreak or something similar, and now they're going to have to go remote. So therefore, that's when remote's going to pick up. Some people are going to be thinking, all right, well, I don't want to trust having everyone in one space right now. So therefore, let's go to virtual. So I honestly believe this is here to stay. It's not just a fad. And COVID was a driver, absolutely. But now that people could see, and especially people such as accrediting bodies can see that, man, it's even cheaper for us to host a class online than to physically have a class. They're not giving up that profit. Let's say it that way. So therefore, I honestly believe that you're going to keep seeing a hybrid version of training for the reasons of money. You can make a lot of money if you're doing a hybrid training. And if you're doing just virtual, you're making a lot more profit, quite honestly, as an organization. So I don't believe it's going to leave. I just believe that it's going to be adapted from area to area, and it's going to be something you're always going to have now that is going to keep pushing on and is going to keep advancing. So when we start getting new technology and we start doing virtual reality training and everything else, it's just going to keep advancing.
That's actually a great segue. So another question that we've gotten is, do you think AR/VR, so augmented reality/virtual reality, will provide a possible alternative to processes that are better fit for on-site training? So this is a bit of a leading edge kind of technology. So have you seen that successfully deployed anywhere, or do you see any potential for AR or VR to play a role in facilitating training that might normally be done in person?
Yeah, actually both AR and VR, especially when you're using the training to simulate situations that if there is an issue with a newbie taking control of equipment or taking control of a situation, and that new hire or the person that's being trained or retrained, they make a horrible mistake in the AR or VR setting, it is not going to be bad. It's actually set up for that. So now as the technology is getting better, more people in some of the industries that are doing it are heavy equipment industries and construction. And then you'll also see it with the people who first embraced robotics, those manufacturing type organizations. They're now also doing this too for operator training. So incidentally, there's a lot of money in those areas as well. So if you are going to target that, especially if you're a consultant or a trainer, then now you're going to have to partner with someone to make sure you are in the cutting edge of that. And that's going to be a choice for you to see if that's something you're ready to branch out for. But the market is going that way. So I'm not sure how many years you got, but you could see the trend already.
Yeah, the framework that I personally use for stuff like this, where there's some sort of new technology, it's being picked up here and there sporadically, and then the question is, well, when does it get picked up more broadly? I think this sort of thing, I mean, AR and VR are kind of buzzwords these days, but if you think about it, this sort of technology has been in use in other industries for a long time, like flight simulators, for example, and training pilots, right? So maybe we don't think of that conventionally as virtual reality or anything like that. It's something that's been around for so long. We kind of don't think of it as a new technology. But I think in that case, the people that you're training, these pilots, they're very high value employees, and the cost of doing real training in the physical world with real assets is astronomical. And having newbie pilots get a bunch of reps in, it's a very costly exercise. And so it doesn't surprise me that that's an application that has taken off a long time ago. And the question is, well, as the cost of doing this sort of thing comes down from a dedicated flight simulator environment down to just putting on a headset and having some off-the-shelf tools that you can use, well, then that opens things up, I think, to other types of applications where you don't need somebody who's a super value, high earning, high value employee, and you don't need the cost of the alternative to be super high either, and this can still be a competitive alternative. So we'll see if that plays out like that, but it tends to be that as the costs come down, you see proliferation of use cases where it kind of starts with the highest value use cases, then it works its way down. Okay, it looks like we got one other question here. Do you have any recommendations for making the training materials themselves more engaging? So I guess this is obviously, I think everyone struggles with engagement with learners, with applying training in a way that's interesting, that keeps people paying attention. So how do you prevent this from just being a check the box exercise?
Yeah, that is the constant struggle for people who are doing physical training. And then also if you're doing training online virtually, So that means you now have to get creative yourself. Some of it will take tools, some of it will just take you figuring out, oh, people like this, let's do this more. So at first, if you're teaching someone in real time, then virtually or in person, quizzes are the ways that you could do it. For, let's say, a Zoom setting like the way we are now, you could use your poll setting and get people introduced to what some sort of concept through going through the polls. When you get your answer, then that could lead you to a different section of your course. Another thing that you could do is truly let the students teach each other in times, and you be a facilitator. So now instead of just pushing all that information to them, give them the concept and then open it up to the floor. And it works a lot better if you pick someone. Hey, Brian, what do you feel about this? And what's your idea on this? So at that point, the students could start facilitating a conversation amongst themselves. You just start it off and you just lead it. When it goes too long, you cut it off like you would in a normal classroom setting. So I think the limits are mostly in our brain. We put up our own construct. Yes, you're only using your visual and auditory settings. And then when you can, you want to go online and truly show somebody, here's a picture. Let's dissect this picture. Here's this idea that I have. Let me show you how to find it for yourself. A lot of times when it comes to instruction, you teach someone how to fish, and then, or even better, you give them the victory speech. So you know that they're going to get bombarded about how was this training? How was this training? How was that? So you're going to tell them ahead of time their victory speech. That is going to be where, oh, well, I learned about this, or I could find this now, or this is where we have this. Did you know? And those are the things that you're going to end up answering those questions for those individuals. And therefore, the training itself will be interactive, but it is constantly listening. You're constantly listening to the audience. You're constantly listening to your gut, because your gut's going to tell you, this is a dead. Let's keep on going. Or, man, they like this. Let's do more of this. So that's the long and short of the answer. If you can make sense out of that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the key takeaway from what you just said to me is that sometimes it's not about, there's no silver bullet to creating some sort of super engaging, super entertaining content, right? Like it's not a matter of, oh, let's make this thing flashier or make it more interesting looking or whatever. But it's oftentimes it comes down to the way you use the materials and the way that the instructors interact with the learners and the learners interact with each other. So I think that's a really great insight. All right, Sheldon, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for all your time here. And yeah, for the attendees, thank you for participating. And we'll be following up with some information. And Sheldon, thanks again for all your time. This has been great.
Thank you for having me. I had a wonderful time, and truly, I'm here for you guys.
Thanks. Till next time. Bye-bye.